uh, sometime in the distant future, there's colonists on Mars, that there's going to be that they're going to develop a mythology about the folks who started the whole movement on Earth, and this ancient prophet named Zubrin, who started it all, and they'll tell stories, and they'll have celebrations around what we've started here today. So it's interesting discussion. Yesterday, I don't know how many of you were in my talk yesterday, where I talked a little bit about philosophy, not too much afield. We're about what we just heard now, that was discussing things on a much larger cosmic level. But on my talk today, I want to get really down to bare tacks on a political issue, and an opportunity for you to engage your elected officials in a very specific way that I think can have a real difference in progressing us closer and closer to the ultimate mission of true settlement in space. So there's an initiative in Washington. By the way, my name again is Steve Wolfe. I work for a company called, I work for an organization called SpaceCom that's putting on a commercial space conference in Houston. I'm here representing myself, not my company. I am working on behalf of an organization called March Storm, and this is very much tied to the panel discussion that we heard earlier in terms of getting politically active and how important that is. So so the panelists on that discussion were urging you to get in touch with your elected officials, let them know what your interests are and how important Mars exploration and manned missions to Mars are. So this is one very specific way that you can get involved and push for a specific piece of legislation. And some of the things we'll talk about here could relate to other issues as well. So I'm going to be speaking about something called the Space Exploration Development and Settlement Act. Essentially, it's about establishing a space settlement goal for the human space flight program of the United States. And the reason why this is important to the Mars Society and the Mars exploration and manned Mars mission is because if there is a space settlement goal, long-term space settlement goal, then we have now a context within which it makes sense for us to do all those things we want to do on Mars, establishing a permanent base there, developing in situ capabilities, ability to grow food and live there somewhat sustainably, because we are doing that so that we can build up the capabilities and technologies that we need in order to eventually have permanent settlement there. So, let me. So I want to talk about I want to talk a little bit about the history of this bill, because this bill has a history in a piece of legislation that was offered up a quarter of a century ago, that I actually was involved in. And if anyone was in the session yesterday, I told a personal story about the genesis of that. Then we want to talk about the genesis of the new bill, the language of the new bill, that's part of the March Storm agenda, the bill's status, what you can do, and then get your input. What else could we do? What else could we do? So if you can engage and give us recommendations about what else we could do to help advance this legislation, I want to encourage you to do that. So the Space Settlement Act of 1988. When I was a much younger man, I worked on Capitol Hill, and I came to Capitol Hill because I was very enthusiastic about space. I was very excited about the idea, even at that time, that one day humankind would expand out into space and that we would settle other planetary bodies, Mars, Moon, and free orbiting space. That bill was set to amend the NASA Act of 1958 to put in language that would acknowledge how important it was and the significance of space settlement is to our culture as an eventual outcome of our activities in space. It will require a report every 2 years from NASA. So basically, it's not just a goal out there. We want NASA to actually be somewhat actively involved in it, in looking into it and paying attention to it. And it also defined space settlement as a community in space that is self-sustaining. The Space Settlement Act itself, it actually became part of the NASA Authorization Bill of that year. It was a sense of Congress. It did not amend the organic language. I was not happy with that, but that was how that happened. It did require a report every 2 years, and it was the first and is still the only place in public law that mentions the term space settlement. As far as adoption is concerned, NASA never presented the required report. There were a number of advocates throughout the years that have asked NASA for that report. What are you doing with that? For those of you who know Lori Garver, she likes to tell the story that she was hired. She used to be the executive director of the National Space Society, and she went to work for NASA in the early 90s. She just left NASA. She was the associate administrator up until about a year ago. But she likes to tell the story that she was hired to work at NASA so that she could be the one to have to take care of the inquiries being made about the Space Settlement Act and why isn't NASA doing something about it. And ultimately, that particular requirement was nullified in subsequent legislation. However, this law was passed, and it's still very much on the books. And it essentially says that Congress declares that the extension of human life beyond Earth's atmosphere, leading ultimately to the establishment of space settlements, will fulfill the purpose of advancing science, exploration, and development, and will enhance the general welfare. So this is an extremely positive statement, and it's on the books now, and this is public law. However, we want to move on to the next step, the next phase of this, and the genesis of the new bill. Some of you may know Rick Tumlinson, who is a leader in the space movement, and several years. And as a matter of fact, Rick, anyone know Rick Tumlinson? Just a few people. At any rate, he was very instrumental, actually, early on in helping to get the first bill passed. So he's instrumental in starting a new effort. The effort was initiated in 2014 by a working group chaired by Rob Notework. The important thing here is Representative Dana Rohrabacher has expressed interest in introducing the bill. He, in fact, actually we're working directly with his staff. There is a draft bill that's currently available. The initiative became a Space Frontier Foundation project. But probably most importantly, the initiative was named, the #1 item on the agenda for the March Storm effort, which is part of the Alliance for Space Development. This alliance is a group of 11 advocacy groups, including the Mars Society, the Space Frontier Foundation, the National Space Society, and a bunch of other advocacy groups. So it's got broad support, and that's really exciting. As a matter of fact, we were on Capitol Hill in March, and this was we did over 100 visits to congressional offices where we promoted this legislation as well as several other legislative initiatives or priorities for that group. So what does this new bill do? It amends the original Space Code, the original NASA Act that was passed in 1958. We want to insert this new language, and it's slightly different from the original language. It gives more teeth to it and makes it more impactful. And it says that the Congress declares that expanding human presence beyond low Earth orbit in a way that enables human settlement and a thriving space economy will enhance the general welfare of the United States and requires the administration to encourage and support the development of permanent space settlements. So the two key operative things here is the clause that says we want to have a thriving space economy. We recognize that without a thriving space economy, we're not going to be able to have a sustainable, any kind of a sustainable community in space. Do you have a question? I'm sorry, could you speak? Oh, it's a typo. Okay, well, thanks. That's not my strong suit, by the way, is spelling. So, and the second second key thing here is that now we're actually, instead of just acknowledging that space settlement is a positive outgrowth of our human space effort, we're now actually requiring NASA to encourage and support the development of space settlement. So we want them to be specifically active in that regard. We are redefining space settlement. You may or may not have heard this particular definition, but now we want to, it used to be that we thought of space settlements as self-sustaining communities that are free from resupply from Earth, and they can grow their own food, and they can sort of live in sort of this enclosed communal type of environment. But in reality, you know, I was just in Hawaii, and 90% of the consumables in Hawaii come from off-island. So the idea of we don't really want it to be completely self-sustaining in that sense. We want it to be economically self-sustaining. So we've adjusted the definition to say the term space settlement means any community of humans living beyond Earth's atmosphere that's able to economically sustain its population through a neutral or positive balance of trades of goods and services, and is able to expand its habitable real estate as need and desire of the community may warrant and international law permits. So we think that's actually an excellent overall definition of what a space settlement should be. And that's in the draft legislation. Reporting and metrics. We have again added a requirement that NASA generate a report every 2 years. And what we want them to do is to examine, do an examination of all of the activities that they're involved in, both inside of NASA and outside of NASA, that could be related or could be seen as technological developments that will help to lead us to, or that are helping to develop the techniques we need for eventual space settlement, right? So, and then we want also, we also recognize that, you know, well, what is a metric? You know, what do we, how do we define, well, if we're getting there? So we're also asking NASA to define a metric in the first year report, so that in subsequent years they can measure their progress against that metric. Even if they choose to change the metric over time, that's fine. But we want them to develop a yardstick that they're measuring themselves against. And we want a review of national space policy. This is an important component. I was just talking to somebody about Scott Pace. This came from who's the head of the George Washington program for science and technology policy. And he said, well, you really want to get the administration involved. And so we put a clause in the legislation essentially recommending to the president to do a review of national space policy as it may relate to space settlement, and encourage them to adjust their policy accordingly. And all of it is, again, to get them involved in the process. We don't want, if you know how policy works, it's not all one-sided. The Congress can't just force the administration to do what it wants to do. There has to be a willingness and a understanding on all sides that this is something that's coming about. So this is a way of encouraging the administration's support for this. So the bill's status, it's ready to drop, which means it's ready to be introduced. It's been reviewed by House Legislative Council, and there's been a draft. The bill is sort of in its final form, ready to be introduced. Representative Rohrabacher has the blessing of the Science Committee Chairman, Representative Lamar. Again, it's a political hurdle to say that the chairman of the full committee that has oversight of that legislation says, sure, if this bill comes up, I'm gonna look favorably on that. We're pushing to find an original co-sponsor that's a Democrat. You may or may not know that Dana Rohrabacher is Republican, a little bit. So we, right. So we're looking for a good Democrat. Donna Edwards, actually, she's on the slide here, but we haven't really been able to. We're working all channels here. As a matter of fact, if anyone resides in a district of a Democratic congressman that sits on the House Science Committee, please make yourself known to me, because I'm going to need your help trying to, because we're still looking for that co-sponsor. We have other Democrats that are lined up that are saying, okay, we'll sign up, but is Donna Edwards on there, or you have other Democrats on there? So it's usually like that, when you're looking for co-signers, it's a lot like, well, who else is on there, So we're still looking, and we're open. Definitely encourage folks to come around. Actually, what I'm going to do is, what I want to do is, for anyone who's sort of interested at all in being kept up to date about what we're doing here with this, I have a sign-up sheet. I want to encourage you to sign your name. You have a pen? All right. Here. Oh, okay, thanks. It's kind of an exciting project, and it's great to have the congressman involved. We're currently that's interesting. We're currently on target to introduce not in early June, but in the fall. So the bill, we didn't quite get it where we wanted it to be to introduce before the summer break. So we're looking to the fall for an introduction, and then yes. Well, the welfare of the United States, actually, there's no money requirement on the bill whatsoever. It's changing policy, and it's seeking to focus NASA's, here, you could just use my pen. Yeah. It's actually looking to focus NASA's orientation, so it's essentially giving NASA a long-term goal for its human space program. And I apologize if it sounds like jargon and a little bit mumbo-jumbo, but we're saying that if we have space settlement, if we have that will help improve the economy, general welfare, that will derive as a society, as a people, all sorts of benefits that will. Right, yeah, no, it's not welfare in terms of that kind of welfare. I think I'm just about done here, and I wanted to, so let's start. We have time for a few questions. Let me just, you could just either leave it blank, but if you want to put like your, like a company, if you want to put your company or whatever, or place of work, or not, doesn't matter. Wow, a bunch of questions. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing that you're talking about, that's a cultural thing. I mean, this kind of a bill could help people within NASA who maybe are trying to change things and change the culture. But the bill itself, I mean, and the kind of thing that Bob Zubrin is talking about, you really can't legislate out. I mean, it's probably more like Harrison Schmitt is suggesting, that you've got to just create a separate entity altogether. So if you really want to get out from under all that, but it's a valid question. Yeah. Right. That's right. Not necessarily, and that's an important point too, because, along the lines of what Charles Miller was saying earlier today, that we could potentially get back to the moon and it not be a NASA project, right? It could be a number of stakeholders that come together that decide that they can do this, and that there's a business model for that, and then encourage. And then with that capability, NASA, they go to NASA and say, well, we have this facility on the moon. NASA, you're supposed to be doing space research. Why don't you come and purchase services from us? So yeah, no, that's very intentional, because we don't want NASA building space colonies. All right, I'm sorry. Maybe I should have made that comment first, because we don't want NASA to build and run the space colonies, because that's not what they should be doing. Space colonies will be a huge international multi-stakeholder endeavor that, when we get to that point, is going to involve, is going to be a big undertaking. NASA is going to play a part in that, but international partners are going to play a part in that. The enlightened business community, enlightened space business community, when we're talking about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, they're gonna come to the table and help us sort out the issues, and so that we can achieve that particular goal and create an economically a sustainable community. Question? Yeah, I mean that's always that's the challenge. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is work with people within NASA to find the advocates within NASA who will say, "Hey, listen, we've got this legislation. We've got to do something about it, and we've got this report that we're required to do." I think what happened last time is there really wasn't any advocates within NASA to produce the report, and then there wasn't much follow-up congressional pressure put on NASA to come up with that report. And then, but occasionally, and I guess there was some testimony or questions about it at some point early on where NASA's response was, well, everything that we're doing is related to eventual space settlement, so we don't need to write any special reports on that. So, and so that'll be key. I mean, it's not just passing the bill this time. It's really, looking to hold NASA's feet, seeking to get NASA to embrace it. If we don't, that's always the, that's a. We have, we have folks that are favorable to it within NASA for sure, and how much they'll be able to, so that's making a difference. Okay, we have a couple more minutes, I think. Yeah. Well, I would hope that when we get to the point where we're doing we're approving budgets, for example, for human Mars missions, right? So those you would couch language that said that in conformance with such and such clause, this law or this clause of the NASA Act, which will be part of the Organic Act, we're doing this because it conforms with the overall mission, because by going to Mars, that'll be precursor activities that are required for eventual settlement. And so it's more, as I get, it's a context that we're trying to create that allows for a robust human space exploration of Mars and Moon, et cetera. Right. It really doesn't get into that issue. That's an issue that I think is going to have to be wrestled with when we get to that point, when somebody actually does want to lay down, want to lay claim or utilize the resources on the Moon. It'll have to be addressed. This bill is not trying to address that. Because of the space settlement, would have to use real estate, right? So that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. So we'll see. I mean, we'll cross that bridge. I mean, I think, yeah, right. But I think that we can do that. I mean, I think that we can pursue this goal, as it says, in accordance with international law. So we would be willing to work out any of these terms as necessary as we get closer to this. No one's talking about having a space settlement, within less than 50 years. I mean, we're talking about long horizon stuff anyway. So, question. We have to stop, but no, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not actually talking about necessarily an American space colony. It could be. Remember, it gets back to that point of supporting the development, and it could be national. My presumption is that it's going to be international. It's going to be an international effort. It's going to be huge, extremely expensive, and so forth. But it could be U.S. But I wouldn't want to presume that. Yes, it's called the Space Exploration Development and Settlement Act. If you go to marchstorm.com, you can see download a copy of the bill. Not yet. So if you know of a favorable senator, let me know. I know. Yeah. Do you have a connection to Cruz? You do? Okay. All right. All right. Cool. Yeah. Let's do it. All right. I gotta get off here. Thank you very much.